Welcome, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this webinar today, and I will kind of kick off our presentation today by giving you an overview of our report. It was a great pleasure to work with a team of individuals to address this timely topic. I will say that in the past year while working on it, we have had a number of interactions with people in the profession. There was a pre-conference at the AAEA meetings last summer that sold out in a matter of days. I think there's a great deal of interest and potential engagement in our profession in these topics, and ultimately it's an exciting new area of activity for our profession. You see there the title of the paper and also the co-authors that worked very diligently on it, and I want to thank all of them for their significant contributions. We were very fortunate to be allowed to release this report at the USDA NIFA Data Summit in Chicago on October the 10th, and we're able to make a presentation at that point and talk about some of the findings in this report. I think it was very timely and well received there as well. And please, we would encourage you to share the report with others, to give us feedback on things. We really view this report as the beginning of a dialogue rather than the ending point of having answered all the questions. I think there is potential for our profession to engage in a number of different areas and to make a real difference in this subject matter. So let me talk about the report a little bit and let me just walk you through some of the major points and areas of the report. First of all, we talked about some of the current challenges to the use and the adoption of big data in the ag sector. We say this even though the adoption has been quite rapid in some respects. But I think we also recognize that there probably could have been even greater adoption because of limited connectivity. Saw an interesting article just this morning, Advanced Access at the AJAE, talking about how a lack of connectivity potentially limits economic development in rural areas, an important point. We think that there's also a significant challenge in understanding data ownership, access, and confidentiality. Not only is this an area that Terry's going to talk about in terms of difficulties from a legal standpoint, but there's also a lot of individuals in the ag sector who simply don't know the facts of the matter here. Thirdly, we talk about the issue of access to the data, breach of data, and these things go hand in hand. Will, for example, researchers have access to this private data, and can we guarantee individuals who share very confidential data or georeferenced data to others? We also think that there's an asymmetric market potential problem here, with individuals having better access to information than others, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We also see a number of real opportunities. We think the sub-discipline of farm management is going to be refined. It's going to become more site-specific. It's going to be reinvigorated in a number of respects. We also think that there are implications all up and down the value chain of agriculture. Food safety is an example that one can more efficiently with this data track and make increases in gains in food safety. Similarly, the question of environmental sustainability is likely to be enhanced as well. That this can be a win-win where producers can provide evidence of their sustainability and documentation. Let me talk about what we see as a role for the ag economics profession in what is likely to be a highly multidisciplinary research venue. We think that the agricultural economics profession, with our unique training, can help individuals understand how to draw valid inferences from big data. In many respects, what we see going on out there is probably machine learning. It is, in many instances, going to be correlation rather than causal understanding. I think our profession brings something to the table in terms of understanding those issues. I think our profession can also take a lead. I think some of our USDA agencies, such as ERS, are examples of how one can maintain data privacy but increase the access to it. One of the things that we foresee is increasingly analytics will come to the data rather than data to the analytics. So the model of me sitting with my desktop computer working on a data set that somebody attached to an email is likely not the future. We think that we can also identify and validate the benefits from these big data analytics. We think that our profession needs to help extension and on-farm research evolve. What we foresee is an increasing reliance on data coming off of machinery, coming off sensors, and various other on-farm devices that may be messy, it may be incomplete, it may be poorly calibrated, but yet it is still an opportunity to learn. And if one can clean that data and use it, it will expedite our research learning. I think we've got to figure out how to effectively manage the data, and we need to figure out what resources and support tools can advance the farm management discussions that I just alluded to. Looking forward, this is kind of our vision of the future in this report. We believe that our profession needs to estimate the value of the technological solutions to the rural broadband access problem. We also believe that big data is going to have applications not only in the developed world, but also in the developing world, and that we should keep that aspect of big data in mind, which is often overlooked. We believe that our profession needs to change farm management instruction, extension, and research to adapt to this precision agriculture data. We think that our profession should engage on sustainability certification. Had an interesting, if you follow me on Twitter, I retweeted something that Bruce Knight said on our campus the other day about the role of economists with respect to sustainability. It's something he put in AgriPulse magazine this last few days. I suggest you take a look at what he had to say regarding our role. I think we also have to look at the markets and contractual solution to the data and ownership problem. I think we have to capitalize on what USDA is already doing. I believe we also are likely to see our profession change in the analytical techniques that individuals ought to be using, and have more people trained in the area of machine learning and other of these techniques, and that we're going to need to be engaged with other disciplines as well. Let me just talk about the concept of big learning. I think with this data, we're going to have to, and we have a comparative advantage among the ag disciplines to know how to take messy data, non-experimental data, and put it in a form that we can actually learn from. Different groups who have talked about big data, not just in the ag sector, but others, have come up with various V's. We adopted one of those lists of 4 V's that we think are descriptive of how big data is relevant in the ag sector. Number 1, you've got to think about the volume that I already alluded to, that there's such a volume of this data that the analytics must move to the data rather than the other way around. In many instances, the data is going to be coming at us at an extremely high velocity, meaning that there is going to be a huge amount of data generated every day, and we must adapt to being able to think of data in terms of flows rather than static data sets. It also was going to come in a variety of forms, some of which are easier to use for analytical purposes than others, and that in many instances the data isn't going to be well vetted. It may not be very accurate. There may be a significant amount of error in the data along the way. And ultimately, big data analytics are the toolkits that we're going to use to address these 4 V's. Let me talk to you a little bit about the asymmetric information issue that we touch upon in the report. You know, as economists, we know that asymmetric information arises when 2 sides of a market do not have access to the same information. We see a number of questions looming out there that merit work within our profession. One of those is understanding what are the market implications of input suppliers and farmers sharing data among each other, with each other, and how much is known by one party about the other party in a negotiation. We look at the same kind of issues all along the value chain. We also think of our market implications of the fact that a lot of this data isn't well verified and not necessarily accurate. I'll touch on this just a little bit more in a later slide, but we think there are real policy implications. With everyone excited about big data, we're concerned about the attitudes and the role of USDA data collections, which historically have been put in place and maintained for decades with the intent of equalizing asymmetric information. We also think that it is important for research funding agencies such as USDA to consider the fact that significant funding, venture capital, has been put in place in this area from the private sector. I think we, as with many other areas of research, we have to ask the question, what should our government agencies be funding and how much? There is a real need, we believe, to consider some opportunities here for public sector research funding. Let's talk a little bit about our vision for agricultural research in the future and how it might evolve from where it is today. Number one, we have a great deal of research and experimental data being produced by USDA agencies, land-grant universities, other universities as well, doing research, collecting experimental data, and so forth. But much of that data is not shared. It's on thousands of jump drives and hard drives around the country. We perceive that in the future we're going to see increased sharing of that data so that others can learn from it as well. The GoDen initiative is an example of work in that area. Secondly, we have program and administrative data from government agencies such as the program agencies at NRCS, RMA, FSA. These data have various privacy protections on them and obligations as well. How can one use this data to advance research and learning without violating privacy as well? We also look at the data being held by the private sector. That's the great big new thing in how much information is being collected by machinery, implements, tractors, combines, etc. And we ask the question, with respect to that data, can a mechanism be created where that data could potentially be shared with researchers and yet the privacy be protected, the same as we discussed on administrative data? And then finally, we view the USDA statistical agencies have a very important role going forward, but it may be a role that evolves. Important benchmarks and surveys that capture important information that none of this new machinery-based big data does. For example, there's very little that, while we have great access to yield monitors on combines, we still don't have great access to farm financials and prices and things like that. And we don't need to forget how important those are to understanding the agricultural economy. With that, I'm going to stop and thank you for the chance to participate.